Greetings and welcome. My name is Narisa and I'm the host of today's ASQ Lean Enterprise Division webinar. We hold these webinars once each month and they are free to all our members. Our webinars are recorded, so previous webinars are available on ASQ Lean Enterprise Division YouTube channel. Our topic for February is kata and the presenter is Mark Rosenthal. The time is 1:30 Eastern Time and 10:30 Pacific. Our topic today, January 9th, for Lean webinar is Change Leadership and Neuroscience, and the presenter is Nicole Lemieux. Some logistics. Everyone will be on mute, but you are free to post questions to the presenter, Nicole, as you think of them. Nicole has reserved about 10 minutes at the end to answer your questions, which we will take one at a time. Here's Nicole Lemieux.
Thank you, Narisa. And before I get started, I also just want to thank the Lean Six Sigma Enterprise for inviting me to participate today and to support your efforts. And especially I want to thank Frank and Hank and Lance and Narisa. So jumping in and getting started, I will say it is always my preference to do these things in person, and it's always odd to me to do a webinar because I can't read your feedback. So I'm just going to keep plowing in. I invite you to post questions, and then we can get those taken care of as we move through. Okay. All right. Why isn't? And we've hit our first technical difficulty. I can't get my screen to go forward. There we go. Okay, my apologies. All right, so just very quickly, I am Nicole Lemieux, and I am the CEO and Catalyst with People Grow. And I would like to invite everybody listening today to get curious and act like kindergartners. And I want you to go back for just a second, and I want you to think about being a kindergartner. And if that's too far back for you, if you have children or grandchildren or nieces and nephews or just friends' children, and if you think about an interaction with them, what do they do? Kindergartners tend to ask a lot of questions. So one of the things that we really want to challenge today is our questioning mode. And so even for yourself, as we're going through the material, I invite you to jot down questions for yourself and act like a kindergartner. Get really curious about what we're doing. Challenge your thinking and challenge my thinking. I welcome that also. So our learning objectives for today are simply to expand, don't you love that? Simply to expand your thinking and change the conversation about change, about management and leadership. I want to help you increase your awareness around collective humanness. Like, what does it mean to be a human being and why it impacts our ability to lead or be led with regard to change initiatives. And then lastly, I want to leave you with something that's tangible, something that you can walk out and you can utilize this as soon as you leave this webinar. And that's learning this equation around V raised to the power of H plus P times 3Q. And what I should put in there also is that it should be greater than friction. If you create and if you engage in a sustainable results model, it will support individual and collective neurofunction and your ability to engage with continuous change. And when we create that, when we engage with that sustainable results model, we posit that it dramatically decreases friction when you're working on projects. I want to introduce you to what we view as a human success system, and I want to start over on the far right side with the technical and operational side of the business, and then performance and productivity. And the three-column model here that you're seeing, we're going to spend all of today really zeroed in on the awareness of self and others, but I do want to touch on the technical, operational, and the performance productivity piece of it. In today's world, with regard to our personal development and our own satisfaction, we really do need to take responsibility for our own development, staying current and staying relevant technically and operationally, whatever that may be. And that means from being a CEO down to being a frontline employee. The other thing that we are saying is is performance and productivity. You can have all the technical and operational ability, but if you can't somehow translate that into performance and productivity on the behalf of an organization, and frankly, the bottom line, then there's a miss there, right? There's a misalignment. So we are suggesting that for the human success system, whether this is at work or this is for you personally at home and what this might look like at home, but you have to have technical and operational capabilities, and you must have performance and productivity capabilities. What we'd like to suggest to people is to spend a little bit more time thinking about the awareness of self and others column, and to make this an and. And we believe that when you focus on the three of these in some sort of an alignment, that dramatically increases your own development personally as well as your satisfaction. So that's the WIFM. That's what's in it for you, is your personal development and your personal satisfaction. I would also like to take this a step further and say that in our experience, people that really do work on the awareness of self and others dramatically improve their performance and productivity and technical and operational abilities and contributions to a company and to the organization. Okay. So I want to start off with something that might look a little bit more comfortable to you, and it's the Plan, Do, Study, Act model, the quote-unquote scientific way of looking at a process. And I think many of you are quite comfortable with this, and you've seen this before, Plan, Do, Study, Act. I would like to suggest to you that Plan, Do, Study, Act process is very much aligned with the technical and operational piece, and then the performance and productivity piece of the human success system. The thing that isn't noted in here are human beings. And I do firmly believe that you can put forth the best process, and on paper it should work fabulously. And then when it comes time to execute, to engage and execute, and sustain, what goes wrong? I firmly believe 80% of the time it comes back to people. And not in the sense of blaming people, to be clear, but it comes back with people's ability to engage in the change, to see the value of the change, and to support the change over time. I believe that language matters. So I'd like to take just a moment and think about the vocabulary that we use. We talk about change, and the way that I'd like us to, and this was simply pulled off of online out of the Oxford Dictionary, change is to give a different position, course, or direction to. That's a very, very broad definition. And then the other word I'd like us to think about is the word management. The act or skill of controlling and making decisions about a business department, etc. So one of the things that I would first like to point out is change management. This is all Plan, Do, Study, Act. This is not about people when you're reading this per se. The people part are the people that are actually doing the business or a part of the department. And I don't know anybody that goes to bed at night and gets up and says, I can't wait to be controlled today in what I have to do at work. I can't wait to be managed through the day. So one of the things that I would like to propose is that when we talk about change management, we are specifically talking about processes and systems, and that we are not talking about people. I'd like us to think about people in this way. Change doesn't, that definition we're going to leave, it remains. It's to give a different position, course, or direction. But I'd like us to think about what leadership could mean. So what could change leadership mean? One of my favorite, and I'm going to suggest to you, there's probably 2.1 million. I haven't Googled the definition of leadership lately, but there's a huge, vast number of definitions of leadership. This is my personal go-to favored definition of leadership. You may have a different one. I'd like to also explain why it's my favorite definition. So in this case, leadership is the genuine interest in another and a talent for fostering positive feelings in the very people whose cooperation and support you need to be successful. There's actually a really key word in here, and it's the first word, genuine. You truly do have to have a genuine interest in another person, and then the talent for helping to foster those positive feelings. And I just want to emphasize, positive feelings doesn't mean that you only tell that person what they're doing well. In fact, it's quite the opposite. One of the best ways to foster positive feeling is to be able to give genuine and sincere feedback. And interestingly, you can give very difficult feedback to people, and it will increase their positive feeling to you as opposed to decrease it. As human beings, we tend to avoid doing that because we think of that as being somehow confrontational or creating some sort of conflict, or perhaps we worry about injuring another person's feelings. At the end of the day, people are craving genuine feedback. So for me, the reason why I really, really like this definition is because it speaks to being genuine, to being sincere. I can't fake that. I need to find an interest in another human being and their success. If I can connect with that, guess what? They will gladly support me in helping me to create my success. Again, this is my personal definition that I really like. If you prefer another, I don't want to argue with that, but for the sake of what we're going through today, I think of change leadership in this manner. Excuse me. So I'd like to talk just a minute about human beings and change. This is actually my son when his name is Vincent, and he was, I want to say about 15 in that picture, and that's his dog, Dirk. And I will say I like this picture of him with his dog because you're already going to a particular place just based on the picture. But I would like to pull you back from that place about a shaggy dog story. And what I'd like to do is tell you about a profound thing that my son taught me when he was 14. So this is the link between change management and change leadership. And my son, he and I were in this rather heated conversation, and I kept telling him what I believed was the next best thing for him to do. I just want you to know this was not a safety situation. This was me being a controlling mother, to be frank. And he got very frustrated with me. And I ended out getting very frustrated with him, and our tone of voice is raising, and we're becoming more angry with each other. And finally he blurts out, "You know my name, not my story." And I can tell you that I had a very visceral reaction. It was like I had been hit in the stomach, and I stepped back 1 or 2 steps, and I realized how absolutely correct he is about that. So the thing is that I was trying to manage a situation as though I completely understood his perspective on something, and there is no way. I mean, I carried him for 9 months. I raised this child. Of course, I know him better than anybody, but at the end of the day, I don't know him as well as I'd like to think I do. He's an independent human being, and I cannot crawl up inside of him and look out his eyes and see the world that he sees it. I cannot process the world that he processes it. Therefore, I need to engage in more of a change leadership stance, which is where I get invested and I have genuine interest in him as a human being or anybody else that I work with, and so that I can learn more about their story. This is also my cautionary tale around the difference between empathy. I know that being empathetic is one of the #1 emotional intelligence skills. I would suggest to you that there is a dark side to being empathetic, and the dark side is that your brain convinces you that you truly understand what this person needs and wants, and at the end of the day, you only know their name, not their story. I prefer to think of the practice I prefer to engage in is empathy, but empathy with compassion, always with compassion. Compassion allows me to see their story and let them have their story without me being able or having to completely understand their story. So human beings and change. This is about human beings being led or you leading human beings through change. Okay, so isn't it kind of interesting that process improvement brings value and everybody knows that it brings value, and then everyone struggles. Even the person's leading the change, frequently they struggle. They doubt themselves. They have a hard time remaining committed, sometimes in discipline to the change, and slowly but surely it may unravel. So I don't know if you're familiar with John Enright's work or Loeffler's work that was done back in the 70s and 80s, but their quotes are still incredibly meaningful today as they were. They're as meaningful today as they were in the 70s and 80s. So change is experienced as painful because it's easier to see what's going rather than what is coming. And frequently, as human beings, we may not like the situation that we're in, but at least we know the situation that we're in, and we've developed this thought that we can at least manage how this situation that we're in, and somehow we have some sort of control over this situation. Okay, so what I think is interesting is, again, this was a quote back from the 70s and 80s, is with the stepping up of the pace of change, we either have to prepare for ever increasing pain, which means that we just deal with change as an event, and that there are these constant events and the pace of the events are ever increasing, or we can change how we deal with change. I would suggest to you that changing through how we deal with change is not about technical and operational capability, and it is not necessarily about productivity and performance. I think those things are outcomes. I think the place we start with this is in that first column, and that first column is through self-awareness and self-management. Ironically, we also have a very difficult time seeing other people, even though we like to say that we have awareness of others. If you don't have a high level of self-awareness, my guess is that you fall into the same trap that we all do, and that's that we project awareness onto that other person. So we project what we think is awareness of the other person, and really it's probably more our own blind spots, if you will. Okay? So the trick here is either we just keep struggling event to event, or we start trying to figure out how do we become more accepting and adaptive with regard to change. And this is where this starts getting a little more difficult. Let's talk about change, okay? I want to think about this again. These are some definitions that were pulled off online, but I want to expand our thinking beyond our initial change definition that we provided. So change is most simply defined as movement. It is ongoing, not an event. Especially today, and in fact, it's again the pace and the velocity is greatly increasing. The movement and change can be incremental and continuous, or the movement and change can be radical and dramatic. I would suggest there's so much disruption in so many industries that at times things feel radical and dramatic more frequently than they do incremental and continuous. Organizational change occurs when a company makes a transition from one current state to some desired state in the future, okay? Then lastly, I like to think about change this way also. It's a situation that can be described for any business or career-related or personal experience, and it requires a significant change in your performance or attitude. And so again, this comes back to you as a human being and your self-awareness and your self-management of that. But I firmly believe that any way you want to look at this, if you were to consider change as a prism and you're trying to look at it as a concept from all different angles, change creates the opportunity for profound development. And I do link this back to Deming also, Dr. Deming's work. So what are the opportunities here around profound development so that we can better cope with change? Well, the first place for me that I'd like to start is our brains are in chains through our neuroscience. Neuroscience, it's the study of the nervous system, including the brain. I want to pause here and I want you to understand how I ended up becoming very interested in brain function and capability. In 1992, I was involved in a car accident, and I'm actually very grateful to Ford Motor Company because it's my firm belief that that car actually saved me from a worse fate than what I did have to endure. But I did suffer a head injury. And it took about 4 years to recover. And one of the most fascinating things that happened was the timing of that car accident was also aligned with a significant technology change, and the technology change was the fMRI becoming commercially available. And so, or the MRI, fMRI becoming commercially available. And so, what was fascinating is how much we didn't know in 1992. We couldn't even fill a pinhead, and now we still can't fill a pinhead. However, we can fill more of the pinhead. So there's still so much that we have to learn. But that's what actually really dramatically stimulated my interest in the brain and its function and how it impacts us and how it can limit us or how it can set us free to really engage in something bigger. And I want you to know from this point forward, everything that I'm going to talk about, I have personally experienced myself, I have personally struggled with, and I personally have developed a practice around. And I invite any questions around that on your behalf. So let's start talking about what do I mean by brains and change. Let's talk about neuroscience. Our brains are wired for survival, and survival is predicated on the perception of threat and reward. So our brains, when we're talking about the survival piece, that is the ancient part of the brain. It is the amygdala. The amygdala is part of the limbic system, and this is the piece where everything gets filtered through for us to determine if there is a threat to us or if this is going to be something that's going to reward us, or is it just neutral. Okay. What's fascinating is as human beings, in order to evolve and to continue the species, the brain developed 5 times the neural networks to discern threat rather than reward. And if you think about back in the old days, long before any of us were around, think about saber-toothed tigers and all sorts of other predators. And then there's, you're walking along and suddenly you're in a sand trap, and or suddenly you have to learn that how to navigate the side of a mountain without falling off of it, and what do you have to pay attention to, or even weather, what things do you have to pay attention to within the weather so that you can detect the threat of the weather. So we've developed 5 times the neural networks to discern threat rather than reward, and we did that in order to survive as a species, and we still have this 5 times the neural networks today. So one of the other interesting things about brain function is that it wants to be predictive, and change prevents us from this predictive function. I personally embrace change. I love change, but frankly, I like my change. I have a little bit more difficulty sometimes with somebody else's change unless I find a way to get connected to it and I can become engaged with it. So when the brain is presented with ambiguity or significant change, and that almost sounds like every day of our lives right now, it goes into a threat response and it reroutes precious energy away from your frontal lobes, and the frontal lobes are the executive function, and that's the part that really helps us navigate our emotions and helps us to manage our responses to things. But we reroute all of that energy into fight, flight, freeze, or even faint. Okay. The other thing about threat is that it's contagious. One of the most interesting things to me is we've worked with CEOs that we were working with a client and they were under a consent order, and the thing that really made the most difference to people, the CEO went out and he presented this he put together this big presentation and this big speech, and finally at the end of it, and you could feel the tension and the stress and just the fear in the room, and finally at the end he put all that aside and he looked out into the audience and he said, but you know what I really want you to know is that we're all going to be okay. This is going to be hard, but we're all going to be okay. And that simple phrase diffused the contagion of threat in the room. Okay, I'd like to talk about some modern saber-toothed tigers, if you will. And I love this cartoon or this picture here, and the point of it is just we are overwhelmed and inundated with information saturation. I would like to suggest to you that is the first challenge that we have to deal with regard to a modern saber-toothed tiger. This creates so much threat for us. So how many of us roll out of bed, or we don't even get out of bed, but we check our phones first thing in the morning? What else do? We might turn on the news, then we might check our email, and so on and so forth. So by the time we even get to work, we've already been inundated with the latest information that's coming out in the world. And I don't know if you've noticed, but so much of it is just incredibly negative. So that is already triggering us to go into a fight, flight, freeze, or faint. And you haven't even got to the office yet. You haven't even gotten to the place where you're going to engage in work. And by the way, you had to navigate through that with your family, and that takes energy also. So I'd like to suggest that one of the first things for us to consider is that we deal with these modern day saber-toothed tigers, and information is one of those. Another one that I'd like to suggest as a modern day saber-toothed tiger is that many of us are not particularly skilled at our own with our own self-awareness and self-management, and we're not aware of our nonverbal communication. So I can't demonstrate this for you, but I'd like to explain it if I can. If I were going in to have a conversation with somebody about a document that they had submitted to me, and I'm distressed because their information is not matching with mine, so I go in, I'm very focused in on the document, and I walk right up to their desk and I put this paper down on their desk and I say, gosh, I'm really concerned about this. Your numbers are not matching mine. So I want you to visualize that. I walk right up on this person, right into their office, right up on their desk, and then I put this piece of paper down and I say, your numbers are not matching mine. So the nonverbals here, the modern day saber-toothed tiger, is I invaded this person's space, their personal space, number one. Number two, I walked up very quickly on them, which any of us would perceive as threatening. Number three, I'm physically standing over this person, and this is the person that I need help from. Now I'd like to take this a step further. When I put that piece of paper on the desk and I said, your numbers don't match mine, the thing I didn't say, but I'm implying very strongly, is that your numbers are incorrect. Mine are correct. And so I promise you that this person is not in their frontal lobes right now. They're in their amygdala, and they're trying desperately to engage with me. But first of all, they have to manage their way through this. So I've created friction, and I've done nothing in order to help move the situation forward. And in fact, I've helped to move us backwards. The third thing that I like to point out with regard to modern day saber-toothed tigers and around this piece is piece around discerning what is actually about you and what is not about you. And frequently we personalize things, and oh yeah, that makes sense because we've been overloaded with information, and it becomes harder and harder for us to discern what is important in this moment and what really has to do with us and what has nothing to do with us. And frequently, most of the time, most of what's going on has absolutely nothing to do with us personally. I'm sorry, we're just not that important all the time. So I want to talk about something a little bit different now, and it's about how we're experiencing the world as human beings. And again, this is based on the work of George Land, and if you are interested, he has a TED Talk out. It's called The Failure of Success. I would encourage you to go look at it. Again, he took some of Loeffler's work and Enright's work, and he took it further. It's the geometric doubling and redoubling of change, and he does this great speech around looking at the last 2 million years of the human history in one calendar year. And so what's really interesting is you can see we had a very slow start as the human species, and then all of a sudden on December 31st, boy, did things really pick up speed. So January 1st, Stone Age. November 19th, we discovered fire, which was a major game changer because now we could manipulate metal. We could, it changed the way we would eat food, and it changed the way that we would live in the world because now we could heat our environment. On the 29th, December 29th, agriculture is invented. Now suddenly we have the capability to feed larger groups of people, and it allows us, between the discovery of fire and agriculture, this allows us to live in communities and to expand communities into towns and cities and villages and such. On the December 31st, there was the advent of the idea of science, and many of you, I'm going to guess, understand that and feel quite comfortable within this idea of science, that we could, there are things that we can learn from science, and that based on those ideas around science, guess what? It led to 11:05 p.m. where industry can replicate. And this became a huge thing because suddenly we have interchangeable parts, and now manufacturing explodes, and our ability to produce product and materials and to make people's lives easier. And suddenly we get into this, you know, having to have a car every 2 years and that sort of thing. And then in the last few minutes, we've made this other extraordinary progress that goes even beyond interchangeable parts in the industry. Now this starts heading in toward, the information age and the data and the digital and all of that sort of thing, and really how we're struggling to manage that. So all of this, if I like to point out with this, the point that I really want you to walk away with is that if you feel overwhelmed by change, it's here, it's okay. It's because that is the world that we're living in. And how are we going to cope with that? And how do we choose to live in that world? And I believe that we do have choice in this. Okay. So I want to talk with you about, oh my gosh, I just said we're in brain chains. Can we break free of those brain chains? So yes, neurologically, we're hardwired to resist change, but is that really where the story ends? One of the things that I was told after the car accident was that whatever I was dealing with was, I had a brain injury and brain damage, and that the injury would slowly heal, but there wasn't any prediction on what that would look like or how that would go. But brain damage was brain damage, and it's just what it is, and you're just going to have to, you know what, suck it up, buttercup, and deal with it. And so I remember immediately thinking, no, I'm not buying this. I don't buy into this. It was an intuitive thing. I couldn't tell you why I didn't buy into it, but I didn't. And that's because this is not where the story ends. There's a little thing that we refer to as neuroplasticity. And let me ask you, everybody has access to neuroplasticity. The more you engage in learning, the more your neuroplasticity also increases and the more effective and efficient it becomes. So for those of you that are listening, for those of you, have you learned a new language in the last year? Have you learned to cook something that you've never cooked before? Have you learned how to become a better parent? Have you learned a new way of a new process improvement protocol? I'm going to guess that you've all learned at least one thing even in the last week, okay? I would suggest that probably in the last year you've learned something significant that you've really had to practice at. That's how we change the brain. That's how we break free of these brain chains. That's how we're going to overcome our resistance to change, all right? So the big thing here, the number one thing to overcome this hard wiring is learning how to ask questions. And there's lots of good information out there on appreciative inquiry and such, but learning how to ask questions. Get curious, act like a kindergartner, ask those why questions, and not just in the sense of 5 whys, but why are we even doing this? Why do we think this is going to make it better? Get really, really curious about what we're doing and how we're doing it. So let's talk about some basic survival skills. You have to learn how to learn. And what's fascinating about this is many of us think, well, no, I went to high school and I know how to learn. I'm going to suggest to you that we need to broaden the way that we learn. We need to be able to learn faster, and we need to be able to develop through that learning how to be more adaptive so that we can choose these better paths going forward. So what I mean by this, what do I mean by learning how to learn? I mean learning how to develop a stronger working memory. Learning how to develop deliberate practices around what you're doing. I'm going to suggest to you that by the time we move through today, that deliberate practice is going to be really, really key for you. The other thing is that there's chunking, the chunking of information. So instead of like having to learn 10 things, see if you can learn 3 new things. The sense of spaced learning is really important. And inquiry is really important. That's what I mean by learning how to learn. Learning how to relate, that's one of the things that we're going to talk about in just a minute, so I'm going to hold off on that. And finally, learning how to decide. This is learning about, again, discerning what's relevant information, whether it's just information for information's sake or it can serve a greater purpose. Learning how to decide. What are you paying attention to? All right, so what does your learning look like? I want you to think about that as a homework question for yourself. And out of these 3 items, where do you think that you could gain the most leverage and improvement? So moving forward, I just really quickly want to talk about a definition of vision, and I want you to re-envision what we mean by visioning. Many people are pretty turned off about creating visions because it seems really big and complex, and oh my gosh, isn't that so 90s? I'd like to suggest to you that there's tremendous power in creating vision, but I'd also like to simplify this for you. So a vision is simply the act or power of imagination. It's a mode of seeing or conceiving. So I want to say thank you to Zingerman's. Zingerman's, if you're ever in Ann Arbor, Michigan, they have a great bakery, great restaurants, great deli. I encourage you to go check them out. So one of the things that we also believe with Zingerman's is that whatever you're developing for a vision, it must be inspiring, it must be strategically sound, well documented, and well communicated. I'm going to suggest to you that for me, the inspiring piece is the piece that speaks to people, and the rest of it is the other 2 columns, all right, the technical, operational, and performance and productivity. We want to take that a step further for you. I want you to think about re-envisioning visioning this way. Think about V, which is vision. Think about it being raised to the power of H plus P, and H is humans. H are humans. And that's first, not P first, but H first, because P is the process or the product. We're going to multiply that by 3 questions, and your 3 questions are, what do I want for myself? What do I want for our team? What do I want for our customers or clients? And these, if you can engage in this formula, this vision will be greater and you will decrease friction. It works. The other thing that I want you to know about this formula is that you don't have to spend tons of time on it, and I'm going to take you through an example. What's important for you to know about this is you can literally hang up after this phone call, and you can answer these 3 questions immediately and alter how you're going to move forward on a project that you're working on. Okay. So here's a question for you. When we look at the roles and reporting relationship in a typical project team, we start at the top, and in the blue, we've got our key stakeholders. We have our sponsor, who's the person, the black character there. We have the project manager, and then we have the team members. And frequently, the project manager spends a tremendous amount of time kind of worrying and scurrying around, trying to coordinate with the team members. They're working on logistical stuff. They're trying to keep everything on focus. And so it's all about the tangible outcome, and there isn't really an opportunity for anybody to step back and think about, what drives the key stakeholders? What are the drivers for them? What are their needs and wants? What are the needs and wants of the sponsor? For me, the project manager, what do I want out of this? For the team members, what might they want out of this? We don't tend to think in those terms. So I'd like you to close your eyes, if you will, for a moment. If you want to read along with me, you can. But I'd like to read this out loud, and I prefer that you do close your eyes because I want you to listen to this. This is a vision example, all right? So this is a typical vision that most people, if they take the time, they would come up with. I will design a unique and creative solution that reflects the way the Smith family desires to use and live in their kitchen and family room space. My vision will allow for better flow and greater comfort while connecting the two spaces where the family spends most of their time. The space will be functional, sensitive to space utilization, inviting, comforting, and aesthetically pleasing based on the Smiths' budget and tastes. I will deliver this project on time and on budget and will be compensated appropriately at specific milestones throughout the project. Upon completion, I will feel pride for seeing my design vision come to fruition, and I will be thrilled that the Smith family has fallen in love with their home again. I should point out that this vision is one that was written for an architect, and I wanted to choose something that had nothing to do with anything that you all might be necessarily engaged in, because I want to get you out of your comfort zone a little bit, and I want to get you away from making some engaging in some auto responses to this. So as an architect writing their vision for their client, I think that this seems like a pretty good vision here. I would suggest, though, that there's something really missing from this. So in my mind, I view this vision as being one that is process-centric. And it's process-centric around what we're going to do and what we're going to deliver, and it's around budget, and it's around that and taste, right? So I'd like to read you, I'd like to take you through a process now to get at the people part of this. So what if, instead of going right to writing this or ignoring it entirely, what if I answered 3 questions? What if I asked myself these 3 questions? The first one is, what do I want for myself? Well, I want to be in service to Ann and Don. I want to be, notice I'm using their first names now and not the Smiths. I will be respectful and patient with their learning curve and set respectful boundaries about how we can best work together to address the scope of their project. What do I want for Ann and Don? I want Ann and Don to feel supported and respected throughout the process. I want them to feel in control of their project, budget, and schedule through education every step of the way. What do I want for our relationship? I want us to feel safe through mutual respect and purpose to address any concern that arises. I want us to not question intent and to stay focused on a positive interaction while creating the space of their dreams. I want to also point out that this, the use of the 3 questions, I want to credit the Vital Smarts group. They're the people that have written Crucial Conversations and Crucial Accountability. And so I want to credit them for that. That's my source there. Those are also great books if you want to dive into self-awareness and self-management. So now that I've answered those 3 questions, let me take it a step further and let me rewrite my vision. So again, would you please close your eyes and just listen to this? It is warm and bright this August 20th, 2018, and we just finished our final walkthrough with Ann and Don Smith on their new kitchen family room renovation. They love the space utilization, aesthetic design, and comfort. It was their dream outcome. They are thrilled, as am I, with their new space. They were equally complimentary on the ease of working together. Because we took the time and provided visual aids and timelines, Ann and Don always felt like they knew why and where we were in the process. They felt like our team had their back and that we were an advisor and a partner on whom they could depend. The schematic design phase was a joy for all of us, despite a significant change on their end that impacted the timeline and budget. They understood, and we worked to ensure the change impact on budget and schedule was managed in a way that was respectful and helpful to Ann and Don, coping with the stress. In the end, they felt supported and in control of their project from beginning to completion. Now, I just want to point out, obviously, if this is a vision and we don't know that this is quite how it's going to play out, but I can pretty much guarantee that in any project, there is going to be some kind of a change, and it will impact your timeline, and it will impact your budget. So let's think about how we want to engage in that ahead of time instead of engaging in it in the moment from a place of ambiguity and a place of fear. Okay, so what I'd like to suggest is this is a people-centric vision versus a process-centric vision. And what I'd like you to see is that there's a very subtle difference between the two of them. But if I'm the one working with this architect, I would much rather have this vision than the previous one. It's about people, people first. Okay, so with today, and I'm not sure how I'm doing on time. 2:10, I'm doing very well. So what I'd like to do is just remind you that we really wanted to take some time to expand your thinking. I want you to think very differently about change and management and leadership, and my hope is that I've done that for you today. I want to increase your awareness of our collective humanness, and I want you to really understand how difficult it is to be led through change and to lead through change. And so could we show a little more compassion for ourselves and our fellow human beings as we negotiate this? And then lastly, I really wanted to provide you with some sort of a tool that you can walk away with, and around the formula with the vision raised to the power of H plus P times 3Q, and that being greater than friction, and that's how you start creating some sustainable results. I'd like to share a really quick story around that before we can open up for questions. And the story I'd like to share is simply that we had done a class with a client in the morning, and that immediately this individual left that meeting, and then after lunch got on a phone call with somebody on her team. And almost immediately things started going south on the phone, and she could feel herself entrenching, she could feel the other person entrenching, she could feel the friction increasing, the inability to move forward in the conversation. Both parties were really digging in around their points and what they thought was most important. And so all of a sudden it flashed in her mind, well, what if I answered these 3 questions while on the phone? And so she very quickly started out with what she wanted for herself, what she wanted for this other person, and what she wanted for their relationship. And she jotted this all down in a matter of 2 minutes, not even. And she said, you know what, Tom, could I please interrupt you? I apologize for interrupting. Could we please press the reset button on this conversation? Here's what I'd like you to know I want for myself. Here's what I'd like you to know that I want for you. And here's what I want for our relationship. Do you think we could press the reset and start over again? Well, after Tom picked his jaw up off the floor, it completely diffused the friction between them, and it completely reopened the ability to engage in this conversation in a far more productive way, and they actually came to a far better place than either one of their individual points of view would have allowed for in the beginning. So I want you to know that this is immediately applicable, even if you don't do the whole formula, just focusing in on those 3 questions. But I would really encourage you, if you're working on a project team, or you're going to partner with somebody on anything, you can do this in less than 10 minutes. And the more you do it, the faster it is and the easier it is for you to do. So with that, I am going to go ahead and say thank you for learning with us. And whoops, that's not what I wanted. Okay. And I would welcome questions at this point.
Thanks, Nicole. We do have a question. The question is, what is the basis of statement brain wants to be predictive?
So the human brain likes predictability. If A, then B. And when we are in a work environment and we have a certain way of doing things, and now you want me to change the way I'm doing something, it creates ambiguity going forward. I don't know what the outcome of this is going to be. And frequently some of the change that we deal with, there isn't any data that actually tells us that this is going to be a success.
Thank you. And the next question we have here is, neuroscience is about study of brain, but behavior and learning needs to be touched. It was continuity of the previous question. Would you like to highlight something on this, or should I move to the next one?
You know what, will you repeat that again for me, please, Narisa?
Yeah. It says neuroscience is about study of brain, but behavior and learning needs to be touched.
Behavior and learning needs to be what?
Touched. So I believe they did not feel it was covered with
So here's the thing. Absolutely. You know what? The connection between the brain and the behavior, if that's what that is, the question is about, is that we have to recognize that that our brain function impacts how we respond to things, and of course, there are many cultural things that impact our personal behavior. But that I believe the first place to start is to understand brain function. And that, for instance, if I am triggered into a threat position, I'm going to behave in a certain way, unless I develop a practice to overcome that.
Okay. Our next question here we have is visioning formula V H plus H, H plus P is not clear with acceptance missing. I see the want and stakeholders. When would you consider acceptance?
So this is an interesting question, and because I'm not able to talk with the person asking the question to fully understand this, I think I understand the question this way. So the acceptance, somebody accepting our vision, I think is what's being questioned. So the part about the vision formula that I think is so powerful is that when you put human beings first and what you want for yourself, the other person, and for your relationship together, it creates a path to acceptance for the rest of the vision. But I have to know as a human being first that you've considered me in this, that you're genuinely interested in me. So, for instance, when I see this question, I see the want of the stakeholders. And so you have this, chances are you have some sort of a corporate direction, initiative, a strategy that you're trying to accomplish, but that actually doesn't mean that you understand the stakeholders' desires and wants out of this project. You can only do that by going to have a conversation with them. Does that help that question?
Okay, I don't know whether he can respond back on this because it looks like we have muted everyone all. So I do not see any other question, but there's one more in here. It's asked about brain predictability is dependent on several factors. Can you please elaborate on this? Hello? Nicole, can you hear me? Hello? Nicole, can you hear me? We lost her. Nicole, can you hear me? Shoot. I can't hear her. I can't hear her. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Nicole? Can you hear me? Nicole, can you hear me?
I can now. I can now.
Oh,
Thank you.
I'm so
I apologize. That's okay.
I'm so sorry. I somehow clicked that, I guess. Okay. Thank you so much. I just saw your text.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Uh,
Um, so I apologize. I don't remember the question in the panic. Oh, I think it was around predictability. There's a great example. It was, for me, the predictability piece was around that we set the technology up and it was going to work really smoothly, and then something changed, and now it throws me into ambiguity, and I have to expend extra energy to figure out how to navigate this, and I have to deal with the initial panic of, oh my gosh, I have people listening into this and they can't hear me, and I'm trying to communicate back with you, but you can't hear me. So that
yeah.
is actually, it's really funny that that's what just happened. That's a great example of the brain wants predictability. And when we don't get it, even in an instasecond or over time, we have to manage that for ourselves. We have to deal with the constant struggle to stay out of our limbic system, to stay out of our amygdala, to stay in our frontal lobes, where we can then engage in higher thinking, and we can better self-regulate ourselves. And it's difficult. It's the longest journey you'll ever take, is from your amygdala to your frontal lobes. So I'm hoping that helps the person that asked the question.
Um, the other question is how coaching and manager as a coach fit in this change model?
How does coaching fit? That's
Mm-hmm.
an excellent question. If I'm coaching somebody, I am going to go ahead and make sure I answer those 3 questions, and I'm going to let that other person know that I'm actually going to let that individual know that my answers to those 3 questions, and if I only do that part of it, okay, but I really love the idea of somebody doing the whole thing and creating the vision and sharing that with that person, and then asking them to provide their vision of what they want from the coaching experience. We hear so many times that people, when they coach, they're coaching on technical and operational skills, and they're coaching on performance and productivity. They are not coaching around self-awareness and self-management. So as an example, for instance, it's great to have a coach help you understand and gain knowledge, but it's also great for a coach to provide you some real feedback. For instance, you know what, I was in that meeting with you and somebody else said X, Y, and Z, and I want you to know I noticed your body language. Do you know what you did when that person was speaking? And chances are the person will say no. And so then there's the opportunity to say, well, what I observed was you rolling your eyes, and I'd like us to talk about what that means and how other people might interpret that on your behalf. That is a coaching opportunity, but I can't go there unless I've set up safety for this person. And the way I set up safety for this person is, what do I want for myself as a coach? I want to be in service to you. What do I want for you? I want you to feel respected and supported, and I want you to be able to receive high quality feedback. What do I want for our relationship? I want us to have enough trust to provide each other feedback, and to believe that in the fact that we want the best for each other. That's just off the top of my head. People need to know that you have them. You have their back, that you're going to support them.
We do not have any more questions. So I do not see in here unless I'm missing anything. But I would like to take a few minutes and wrap it up. Do you have anything else, Nicole, that you would like to share? Are we ready to wrap it up?
No, we can wrap it up. I just want to say thank you very much to everybody. I appreciate your time. I know everybody is busy, and thank you, Nerissa, for all of your help.
Thanks, Nicole. I would like to thank Nicole for taking her time to share with us some very important and interesting information that can be applied to any business organization and share the real-time application and experience on a daily basis. As I said earlier, Nicole's presentation is now recorded and will be posted on the ASQ Lean Division YouTube channel later this week. I want to remind you that the topic for February webinar is kata, and the presenter is Mark Rosenthal. And thanks again to everyone for participating in today's webinar. Have a great day. Thank you.